The mayor of New York City, Zoran Mandami, has announced that he's going to start with his plan to have government-run grocery stores in New York City to try to lower the prices. He's planning on 5 right now, and the target is 30% lower prices than normal grocery stores. So this is very interesting. Zoran is one of my favorite characters alive right now. Not because any of his policies are good, they're all quite the opposite, but he's such an interesting archetype. But a lot of people might not understand why this is bad, might think this is a good thing. Of course we want cheaper prices, things like that. So this video is going to be a bit different. I'll give kind of an economics lesson on why this doesn't really make sense to do. So yeah, and why he might be doing it anyway. That'll be later. So a lot of people think that businesses are these evil things, these greedy things, which try to take as much money from you as possible, which is not wrong. But people also think that the government is this Mr. Nice Guy angel, benevolent entity that only seeks to help people. That's completely wrong. And it's also the fact that a lot of people think that, well, because these businesses are greedy, that's why we're paying so much. When in reality, not many people know this. Grocery stores tend to run a profit margin of around 1 to 3%, which means for every $100 they make, they only make about $1 to $3 in profit. So, if you were to run a grocery store with a target of making 0 accounting profit, meaning at the end of the year, it's net $0, you would only lower prices by like 1 or 2%. Meaning it would be essentially unnoticeable, right? If you had a $100 grocery bill, it would go down to $98. You wouldn't even notice that, right? Which is crazy. Most people don't know this. And it's the same thing with airlines. They also run razor-thin profit margins on average. The same thing with gas stations. You'll see that prices are not an indicator of greed, but they're an indicator of resources, the scarcity of resources. That's literally what they are. Prices indicate information. Now, once you shift your thinking to this way, instead of thinking about prices as unfair, lots of things will start to make more sense, right? So the question is, if normal grocery stores are only running 1 to 3% profit margins, how is Zoran Mandami going to undercut them by 30%? Is it because the government can run stores and grocery stores more efficiently than private sector can? No, obviously not. In fact, it's almost certain that he will be less efficient in running them because of many different things, but because the goal is not profit, right? The goal is not to distribute goods efficiently. The goal is to, I don't even know what the goal is actually, but for some sort of charitable reason. And they're definitely going to hire workers not based upon merit, but, on trying to help out certain communities. They're probably going to pay them a lot. They're probably going to have unionized workers. It's going to be bureaucratic, right? So it's not going to be as efficient as a normal grocery store is. But you know what? Let's give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that it's as efficient as a normal grocery store. Well, if it's as efficient as a normal grocery store, then there is no way to undercut them by 30% without going massively in the red, which is obviously what will happen. So these grocery stores are going to be losing a lot of money, even if they are run perfectly. Now, what's going to happen? Where does that money come from? Well, it doesn't come from thin air. So it will have to get subsidized, meaning the losses will be compensated for in the form of taxation of other stuff. So like some of the new taxes he's rolling out, for example, like those higher property taxes on second homes, things like that. You'll have to have more taxes to be able to handle this loss that you're incurring on this front. So when you think about it, it really doesn't make sense. Now, I already hear the objection from a lot of left-wingers and socialists that say, well, okay, let's say you don't want to sell at a loss because that might be bad, because you have to take more money from the people and you're distorting the economy further. But let's say you don't want to sell at a loss, but you want to break even, right? So you want to make zero profit. It's like, well, why can't he do that? Even though it would only lower prices by 2%, why can't he do that? And it's quite funny because what they don't realize is that businesses in a competitive market, in a market that is close to perfect competition, again, such as gas stations, grocery stores, airlines, many different industries, already sell their goods at cost. They don't make a profit. Now, that might be shocking to you, but really what it means is they don't make an economic profit, right? They earn a normal profit, which is zero. They may still make money on the books, right? They'll earn a profit at the end of the year, let's say $100,000 or something like that. However, when you take into account the opportunity cost of all the resources that were used, they won't earn a profit. For example, all of the money that went into buying the store, all of the entrepreneurship effort that went into it, all of the wages that they paid, all of the grocery items, everything like that. The total cost of all of those goods could have been used somewhere else to make some amount of money. And ultimately, it will even out where the opportunity cost is equivalent to the profit that they make, which is an accounting profit, which means it's zero. That's how a competitive industry works. Because what happens essentially is that when a business is making more than normal profits, competitors will see that and join the industry. And when they join the industry, there's more competition, obviously. And it will cause them to undercut each other's prices to try to capture market share. When they undercut prices, they are now making less profit, and then consumers are benefiting. And then ultimately, if they undercut each other too much, now they're not making enough money. Some of them will leave and go somewhere else with their resources that will earn a better yield. So we see that if a market is allowed to be competitive, firms sell their goods at cost. It's simply not literal cost, it's also combining opportunity costs. But it should combine opportunity costs because every resource that you use has an alternative use. So that is why opening up grocery stores doesn't make sense, because it's already a competitive industry. It would make much more sense to open up a business in an industry which is not competitive, which is earning outsized profits. But of course, that's not the role of the government to do that, and the government will do it less efficiently. Here's what actually would make sense, right? If you wanted the cheapest possible prices for the consumers, here's what you would do. You would give them back the tax money that you took from them, that you stole from them, right? And with that money, they would then invest it into different ventures, increasing competition, capturing some profits, but ultimately making the industry more efficient, dragging it down to a normal profit, which shifts the surplus over to consumers. Now, I know I said a lot of buzzwords there, but essentially what I'm saying is that it does not make sense to enter an already competitive industry. All of those resources could have been used more efficiently elsewhere. And we know this because prices and money convey information about what people want and about where resources are most desired. Think about it like this. This is called the economic calculation problem. It's a bit different. But imagine you were trying to build a railway and you had to build it either through a mountain or around a mountain, which one should you do? Well, it's kind of hard to say. You would have to decide, okay, where should we, where is steel best used, and where is the engineering effort and the dynamite, etc., best used? Because obviously building around the mountain will cost more materials, but building through the mountain will take a lot more effort and work, and a lot more engineering. So how should you decide where to use these resources? Well, you look at the price of the resources. If steel is cheap, then it makes more sense to go around the mountain. If steel is expensive, then it probably makes more sense to go through the mountain. That's the reason why prices exist. Or even if it's not the reason, that's what prices do. They convey information. So when you try to avoid prices in general, like if you try to sell, I don't know, let's say 30% below the cost of groceries, you're making a mistake because you're distorting the information that is conveyed in those prices. Another thing is that, listen, it's not a large scale, so it's not that big of a deal. But obviously this is going to hurt businesses that are in the grocery business because they are already running very thin margins, and now some of their customers will no longer go to those grocery stores and will go to the state-run grocery stores instead because it's cheaper. Now, they are building them in neighborhoods that generally do not have major grocery stores. So people think that, oh, that's the role of the government, should go in there. But you have to wonder, why did those places not have grocery stores in the first place? Is it because corporations hate making money? No. Is it because corporations are evil and want to deprive certain people of groceries? No, obviously not. It's simply that it was not economically feasible to go into these locations. Meaning, the combination of theft and the demand was not there, essentially. There's too much stealing and the demand was not there. And so either they were there and they pulled out, or, as Walmart did recently, or they chose to never set up shop there because they decided it was too risky. They couldn't turn a profit. Now, instead of perhaps the government trying to help by more properly enforcing the law, they decide, oh, let's open up our own grocery store in here. It really doesn't make sense. And in fact, if you did want to redistribute money from the rich to the poor, which is obviously what the grocery store is doing because it's going to lose money, which is going to come out of the taxes of the wealthy, then you should simply give money to poor people. Why would you start a grocery store? It's a very roundabout way of doing that. Do you guys understand what I'm saying there? Is that if you really want poor people to save money, wouldn't it make more sense to give them money and then they would be able to choose what they want to do with that money instead of having to have lower grocery costs? You know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't really make sense. So the whole thing is pretty ridiculous. I'm not sure what the goal is. Well, it's definitely not having cheaper prices. Well, that might be the goal, but it's ultimately not efficient. Now, I have my suspicions about what the goal really is that I believe that he's trying to essentially harm private industries. So he's doing the same exact thing with the rent controls and rent freezes and all that stuff when it comes to landlords, right? So landlords are not evil. They are simply trying to make money, and they are constrained by competition. When you artificially do these rent controls and rent freezes, you are interfering with the free market. And so what that does, let's have a hypothetical for you guys. So imagine the mayor freezes the rent for 2 years on an apartment building. What happens? So the people who are currently living in the apartment building, they do benefit. So there is that, right? Of course, that's definitely true. And obviously the landlord gets harmed because now he's making less money because they're going to be paying below market rates, right? But who else gets harmed? Well, whoever is not currently renting gets harmed because they may have been willing to pay more for an apartment unit, but now they don't have access to that apartment unit because the government is now restricting their freedom to do what they want with their money. So, before, the landlord would have gladly rented it to them for $2,000 a month, but now the rent is free as at $1,800 a month, and the landlord can't rent it to them. He might have to randomly pick who he wants to choose. And in fact, he'll probably choose the tenant who he believes would cause the least amount of damage or whatever. Whereas before, the tenants could differentiate themselves by choosing to pay more money. So the person who was willing to pay more money is the person who wanted that good more. Now they're being deprived of that. So it really is not fair to them. Not to mention, now that future landlords know that the rents could freeze at any time, they'll be less willing to build more apartment buildings, which is increasing the housing supply of the city. And ultimately, what's going to happen is that... Sorry, there's a plane flying overhead. But ultimately, what's going to happen is that the government is going to declare, oh my goodness, these private industries are not taking care of the properties, which is because they can't raise enough money through rents, not because they're evil, but because they're being artificially restricted. So we need to condemn and take over these properties. And the similar thing may happen with grocery stores, not exactly take them over, but he will simply run them out of town. And when they get run out of town, you will need even more government grocery stores, and it will go on and on. And there's no reason why this would stop, right? Why stop at grocery stores? Why not have government-run gas stations? Why? Why not have government-run airlines? Why not have government-run restaurants? Like, what's the justification for stopping? In fact, why would you only discount the groceries by 30%? It sounds pretty greedy to me. Why not discount them by 50%? Why not 90%? Actually, in fact, why don't you give away free groceries? Why not? Really, it doesn't really make sense to me. It's kind of arbitrary. There's no real reason why he's doing this or that. And ultimately, he's trying to undermine the free market to further along his plans for sort of left-wing socialism, where the government owns a lot of the businesses, the means of production, etc., where instead of the market deciding, and remember, the market is made up of everybody, is made up of a bunch of individual consumers. So instead of letting individual consumers decide, he's going to have the government decide what to do, where to go. The motives will not be making profit, but instead some vague notions of equality and stuff, which will ultimately only end up making people worse off. So I thought I'd give this lesson in economics. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I'm open to making more videos about this stuff. I find it super interesting. As you guys can probably tell, it's like my one of my special interests, But ultimately, the free market is the way to do things efficiently. Anything else is getting in the way, and you're ultimately hurting people. But yeah, that's about it. See you guys.